Jasper, I'll feed off of you.
All right, great. We'll let everyone get connected here, and then we'll get to the introductions.
Yeah, Paul, I'm going to speak after Jasper opens it up, just for a couple of minutes.
Jasper, you, then me. Is that it? And then Jasper,
Yes.
you're running.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jasper Boers, and I'm the student president of the Buckley program. I'm very excited to welcome all of you to a very special event this afternoon with former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. Before I introduce our guest, I just want to say a few words about the Buckley program. The William F. Buckley Jr. program is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity and open political discussion at Yale. We host lectures, dinner seminars, fire and line debates, and an annual conference. Our over 300 Buckley Fellows have a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious conservative thought, the Buckley program forwards its mission of a more open and more representative political atmosphere. Especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge, Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives, including those of the right, must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the program and how to become a fellow on our website, buckleyprogram.com. Now, to introduce Speaker Ryan, I want to turn it over to Bill Kunkler, class of 1979. Mr. Kunkler is a longtime supporter of the Buckley program and is the person who made this event possible, so we are especially grateful for his efforts.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Jasper. I am pleased you could join us today to be part of the conversation with my good friend, Paul Ryan. I really appreciate him for taking his time today with us. My wife and I came to know Paul back in 2011 and were inspired to work for him and Mitt Romney during the 2012 campaign. We believed in their agenda to lead our nation and expand the tent of the Republican Party to include more minorities, those who believe in principles of limited government and fiscal responsibility. Speaker Ryan was the 54th Speaker of the House, a position he held from October 2015 until January of 2019. He was the youngest Speaker in almost 150 years. He never lobbied for the job, but was selected by his caucus because he stood as the best leader among equals. Speaker Ryan represented the 1st District from Wisconsin for over 20 years, starting in 1998. Throughout his political career, Paul has been the fiercest advocate in Washington for creating and maintaining an entrepreneurial society for all. That was the core of his Better Way agenda as Speaker, which included his 2017 tax reform bill. In addition, he also passed bipartisan Opportunity Zone legislation, which was signed into law to encourage risk-taking in underserved communities. Now that Paul is out of day-to-day politics in Washington, he's engaged in several business activities, which you'll note in his bio, and still strives to help the less fortunate through his American Idea Foundation, with a mission of making sure opportunity zones become embedded in our economy. This effort stays off the radar, but speaks volumes to Paul's character. Well before the George Floyd tragedy, Paul was working on issues that affect Black America with no expectation of political benefit. One comment by Bob Woodson, a leading Black civil rights and community activist that I heard at more than one meeting with Paul, has stayed with me. Paul Ryan shows up more often in troubled neighborhoods than members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Think about that for a minute. I know Paul will cover the current dysfunction in the Republican Party and the efforts by President Biden and friends to expand government, not seen since FDR, in his comments or during Q&A today. Unfortunately, that will not give him time to discuss the current turmoil with his beloved Green Bay Packers because of the controversy with their MVP quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. As a Chicago Bears fan, you know I feel his pain. Please give a warm Yale welcome to Speaker Paul Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. There's a phrase we say in Green Bay about Chicago, but I want to be nice and not use any bad words here today. But I think you can hear what I would say as a Packer fan about the Bears, because the Bears still something or other. You know what I'm about to say. So good to see you, Bill. Jasper, it's really nice to meet you. I'll just start off with some brief comments. Jasper, you asked me to talk about a few things and then open it up for Q&A. As we discussed in the pre-call here, how about if I just give you a take on Biden's first 100 days, some of the big issue challenges we're facing and the conservative movement or the Republican Party's need to be better in order to tackle these challenges. And then just some of the bigger challenges facing our country in poverty. That's something I personally like to discuss. So I'll just do that in a few minutes. And then why don't we just open it up, Jasper? Sound like a plan?
Sounds great.
Great. So I would argue that the person that made Joe Biden president is a unique voter. And it's a voter that you can actually fairly well extrapolate from states like Wisconsin or Arizona or Georgia or Pennsylvania. It is the voter in the suburban districts. It's the suburban voter that typically votes for Republicans. That suburban voter, a college-educated suburban, typically white-collar voter, was the margin of difference in those key battleground states that gave Joe Biden the presidency, and he did legitimately win the presidency. And that voter voted for Joe Biden for two reasons. This is my thesis, and from knowing these voters and representing these voters for many years, I feel pretty confident in making this. Number one, they didn't like Donald Trump. They didn't like Donald Trump's personality. They didn't like the Twitter. They more or less liked the policies, but not the man. Number two, they liked the person in Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a nice person. They thought Joe Biden was going to be a centrist, a bringing people together, a consensus builder. And so they voted for that. My argument in this first 100 days, and look, the reason I think this voter is really more center-right is because down ballot, they voted for Republicans. They voted for the Republican for the Senate. They voted for the Republican for Congress, but not for president. So this is the voter that basically made Joe Biden president, that gave him the Electoral College, 306 electoral votes. That voter is not getting what they voted for one reason or another. President Biden has decidedly focused on unifying the Democratic Party and not unifying the country and not bringing the country to the center, which is what I think that voter largely was hoping for and thinking they were going to get in a Biden presidency. The reason I say that is that's the conclusion one can just make without any hesitancy about the first 100 days of the Biden presidency. There are two occasions in which I believe President Biden had a glorious opportunity to reach across the aisle, reach consensus, and be a common ground consensus-making president. Number one, COVID relief. 10 US senators from the Republican ranks offered Joe Biden a deal, a cooperation agreement, to a joint exercise to have a COVID relief package that would have been more than sufficient for addressing the needs for COVID and the economy. Would it have been $1.9 trillion in spending? No, but probably 1.1, more than enough than was needed. The second time, so that was, they used reconciliation and went one party control. Their argument was in 2010, Republicans, and I was there then, didn't work with Obama when he put together a stimulus plan. Obama had a 60 vote Senate, a massive majority in the House. You could arguably claim he had a mandate at that time. And they did not look for feedback from Republicans. They basically wrote their bill, said, are you with us or against us? Doesn't matter, we're passing it anyway, and did that. To draw parallels to that time would just be inaccurate. And unfortunately, I think that's what the Biden folks thought. They thought this would just be like 2010, so let's not bother working with Republicans. The difference here being it's a razor-thin majority. The country sent to Washington virtually tied Congresses, a 50-50 Senate and a 5-vote margin House. Yet they kind of went the 2010 route and went a solo route. So I think President Biden had a chance at getting a real good bipartisan win, which would be good for the country, chose not to do that, go with the progressives. Number two, on infrastructure. He rolled out his infrastructure bill. Again, a massive blowout of spending. The most generous reading of the bill is about a third of which is infrastructure. 2/3 is not even infrastructure spending, with what we would consider horrendous tax policy, slow growth tax policy, which would reignite corporate inversions, where corporations move overseas, where we would lose capital and wages would actually be depressed as a result of this. Productivity would go down. Again, a group of Republicans in the House and the Senate approached the Biden administration and said, we want to work with you on infrastructure. Infrastructure is traditionally bipartisan. We believe we ought to have a user fee infrastructure system. We don't even tax electric vehicles because they don't use gas for roads. So we should come up with a solution there, like a VMT, a vehicle miles traveled tax, so that all those people buying electric vehicles, which we want to encourage, should pay for the use of the roads that they're driving on. Again, they've walked away from this and try to go another reconciliation route where it's just one party when they had an opportunity to go bipartisan. Maybe they'll still do that. But in the first 100 days, I think what the president has done is he's sort of outsourced the policy making and the politicking and the policy design to the progressive wing of the party, the dominant, loud wing of the party, instead of cutting deals in the center where he did have and does have Republicans, enough of which want to work with him on that. So my read in the first 100 days is that voter that gave him the presidency in suburban America is not getting what they voted for and is probably a little upset. And he's unifying the Democratic Party around the progressive party policies versus unifying the country. An issue that I think this begs to be discussed is our debt and our deficits. Our own party was not good on this recently. President Trump, frankly, was not interested in spending cuts or balancing the budget. We did pass an enormous debt-reducing piece of legislation, a healthcare entitlement reform in the House in the Trump era, but it failed by one vote in the Senate. I'm proud of the fact that in the House, when we were in the majority from 2011 through 2018, every session we passed a budget that actually balanced the budget and paid off the debt. It did the tough things like moving the retirement age and means testing entitlements, lots of different reforms to Medicare and Medicaid and a lot of spending programs. Regrettably, those couldn't even pass the Senate, let alone get on the president's desk. So both parties have failed on the mantle of fiscal conservatism. But if this Biden plan, the infrastructure plan, and the new entitlement family plan that he's offered with the attendant tax increases were to actually pass, and I don't think they will, but if they did pass, they would do some really big damage to our economy. Number one, the kind of unemployment system we have today, you're effectively paying workers to not work when there are jobs being made available. I just read an analysis by an economic firm that says in some states, it's the equivalent of $21 an hour to not work. So to get a person into the job market, you have to have higher wages, which is a good thing in and of itself, but it could be one of the sources for the inflationary discussions we're having. What I'm trying to say is we have a situation where last month we were expecting 1 million jobs to be created, and we created 250,000 jobs. That is very startling. It's the biggest drop off in expectations versus delivery of results versus the actual results we've seen since we've been taking this survey. That's concerning because we have jobs being offered as we're coming out of COVID, yet workers not coming off the sidelines to go into the workforce. The second problem is if we were to create all these new entitlement programs that President Biden's proposing, the cost of which are around $7 trillion, far in excess of what they're claiming because of the way they're writing this legislation, it would give you a huge burst of permanent debt. We had temporary debt for COVID that's absorbable. If it's transitory from a large macroeconomic standpoint, that's okay. But if you build on top of this big surge in our debt, now $28 trillion, new permanent unpaid for entitlement programs, you're simply hastening the day we're going to have a debt crisis. You're hastening the day our world's reserve currency status is called into question. And then if you combine that with tax policy that slows down economic growth, slows down job creation, slows down productivity, which slows down wage increases, that slows down standard of living increases, then you've gotten yourself in a real bad problem. And with the kind of monetary policy we have today and the spending policy that's being proposed, you really could have a stagflation problem. We haven't seen stagflation since the late 1970s. So I see a combination of bad monetary policy with bad fiscal policy. And let me just say one thing. The Federal Reserve did a great job on fighting the pandemic, on fighting the COVID economy. But I would argue the taper should probably come sooner rather than later so that we don't wind up with a real tough inflation problem. If we have that, workers' wages are debased. The purchasing power of people earning dollars, living on fixed incomes is reduced. So we have a real economic crisis on the horizon, which I would argue the center-right party, the Republican Party, is really the better party equipped to tackle this. We've got to get our own house in order. We have to get our own act together. But if we go down this path of actually passing these things that are being proposed, new unpaid for entitlement programs, new encouragements not to work, bad tax policy that slows down the economy, and continued spending and loose monetary policy, you're going to see the kind of toxic policy mix we haven't seen since the Jimmy Carter days. And this is at a time when America's dominance in the global financial markets, when our world's reserve currency status is not something that we can take for granted. If we lose our world's reserve currency status, the cost of our financing of all of our government goes really high. We lose this privilege. It's harder to maintain our social contract, which is extremely important. And with the advent of cryptocurrencies and digital currencies and central bank digital currencies, all of that is just going to hasten this moment. So we're going into an era where we have got to get our economic fundamentals right. This is what I spend a lot of my time on. The last thing I'll say is people ask me what I'm up to these days. I teach economics at Notre Dame. I'm a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a think tank in DC working on these issues. And as Bill mentioned, I have a charitable foundation called the American Idea Foundation, working on center-right market-based poverty solutions. I think the best tool for fighting poverty is free enterprise. And free enterprise applied to the problem of poverty in both people, but also policies and ideas is a wonderful way in which we can actually break the cycle of poverty, go at root causes of poverty, and reignite this beautiful notion of upward mobility. The idea of a government built upon equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, but a government based on natural rights and natural law, where we have a pluralistic society, where we are free to pursue ourselves, our dreams, and the condition of our birth doesn't determine the outcome of our life, is the kind of country I enjoy living in. It's the kind of country I want to continue living in. And it's the kind of country I think the center-right movement has got to improve its game to be able to deliver and offer the kinds of services in the government that I would argue the center-right country would like to have. And so these are some of the challenges that we're facing these days, both from conservatism to the progressive policies that are right in front of us and the horizon problems that are facing America. You get these problems under control, along with a few other things like fixing our broken immigration system, and I think we're going to have a great 21st century. But we've got to get on with being able to fix these problems. And if just speaking, since I'm speaking to a group of college students, you don't fix these problems by shutting down different voices. You don't fix these problems by enforcing some kind of ideological or academic conformity. Yeah, you get to the best answers by having pluralism, by having diversity of thought, and a real good debate on ideas, a battle of ideas. So Jasper, with that, I think I was going to riff for about 10 minutes. I think I probably went over a little bit. Be happy to open it up.
Perfect. Thank you, Speaker Ryan. I just want to mention that I'll begin our discussion with several questions of my own, but I hope to get in as many audience questions as possible. So please submit questions throughout using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. I see a number of people have already done so. Speaker Ryan, I think the most obvious question, given your remarks, perhaps the sort of most pressing question is what Republicans can do to recover the vote of that voter who voted for Biden in 2020, and who cares about, the economic trajectory of the country, who cares about consensus building, and who cares about kind of stability in a meaningful political sense.
Yeah, I'm going to give long remarks on this very topic at the Reagan Library at the end of the month. I'm on the board of the Reagan Library as well, a speaking series called The Time for Choosing, way before your time, Jasper, but Ronald Reagan gave a very important speech, kind of the speech that launched him at the Goldwater Convention, called The Time for Choosing. And it really was a speech that sort of launched the future of the conservative movement, which spawned what we now refer to as the Reagan era. I'm going to be doing a speech addressing that very question, but then a lot of leaders in the party over the course of the next year are going to the Reagan Library to do their version of that speech. So I won't try and jump on my future lines in this speech, but I'll basically say this. We've got to build an inclusive, aspirational, center-right political movement that speaks to everybody and that does not play identity politics. That's basically my quick answer to if the center-right party joins with the left-wing party in playing identity politics, then our natural law-based society, our natural law-based experiment, I think, is shredded. So the American creed is shredded if everybody in the political spectrum plays identity group-based politics. My group against your group, slicing and dicing people in groupthink. It's really dangerous. I think identity politics is immoral. It tries to divide people into different subsections and pit them against one another. It's divisive. And so there are those in the right who flirt with identity politics. It may be temporarily successful, but they will clearly come at the long-term expense of success. And so I think, not unlike Reagan, but for our time, aspirational, inclusive, conservative movement that gets that forgotten men and women, the wage earner, blue collar worker in rural America that is now a Trump, the Trump Democrats, just like we had Reagan Democrats, them, along with those suburbanites I discussed, that sort of suburban college educated voter who wants conservative economics, who wants free market economics, who wants a pluralistic society. There is a coalition, a majoritarian coalition for the making. I think we just have to put together a party that is inclusive and attracts people, young people, minorities, people of all walks of life, to a vision of society that is accessible to everyone and that is done in such a way that is inclusive. That's the answer that we have to get to if we want to be successful.
So, that's certainly been one failure of the GOP recently, but one of the successes, and many have sort of lauded GOP's efforts to become a multi-ethnic working class party towards like a working class conservatism. And turnout, of course, in 2020 was higher than expected among Black and Latino voters. And I'm wondering what you think the Republican Party has to do to capitalize on that success and keep the momentum building.
Yeah, I think build on it. So look at the Hispanic vote, the African-American vote was a very good vote for the Republicans in 2020. So I think we need to build on that success because they see us as the party for the working person. They see us as the party for the labor or the working person. I think we have to combine that with a vision that is also attractive to that sort of suburban college educated voter. Frankly, that college educated suburban voter voted down ticket for Republicans. So they voted for the Republican for Congress, for the Senate, for governor, for state legislature. They just didn't vote for president. That was mostly on personality, I would argue. So I really do believe that there is a ready-made coalition here for the making, which hopefully will manifest itself in 2022, where we can retake the House and the Senate. But I think that coalition is there. But I think we have to make sure that we are an inclusive party that wants everyone in this party and that we are speaking for that worker, that wage earner, that wants upward mobility, that wants a better life. I'll put it this way. We put in place policies in 2017 and 2018 that made a big material difference in people's lives. The economy we had pre-pandemic was the best economy we've had in arguably our lifetimes. Depends on how old you are. But it's an economy that the bottom 25% of workers did better than the top 25% of workers on growing their wages. The bottom two quintiles of workers had faster wage growth than everybody else, far faster than inflation. So they were seeing a material increase in their living standards. Our unemployment was the lowest among African Americans, among Asians, among women, among Hispanics. Our poverty rates dropped dramatically. So we saw great economic performance because of good economic policies, regulatory relief, tax reform. We were moving down the path of reforming secondary education, meaning the two-year school associate's degree education, skills training. So we had excellent economic policies being put into place. I take issue with some of the trade decisions Trump made, but putting that aside, we had outstanding economic policies and we were seeing a very durable, strong economy. Having said all of that, if Biden just does nothing, doesn't pass these bills and opens up the government and kids go back to school, I think you're going to see a healthy recovery based upon this solid foundation of growth of what we had was regulatory certainty. That's not as certain as it used to be, but we have very good solid tax policy, which was many years in the making, which has made us much more competitive and has allowed business investment to grow faster. And that has raised wages, that has raised productivity. Let's just get that going again and then focus on these other discrete problems we have.
So on, all these Republicans who are trying to kind of claim the mantle of leadership in the party, there's a bit of a difficulty over picking, what issue should I campaign on? What issue should I run on? Of course, we have Republicans campaigning on social issues, on China, all sorts of things. The Republican Party used to tout itself on the kind of fiscal responsibility that you've really emphasized in your remarks, but that message hasn't really seemed to work as well in winning elections recently, and nor has it been consistently practiced by Republicans winning the presidency or congressional seats. So I'm wondering how you think fiscal responsibility can remain a central plank of the Republican platform. How can it be fused with policy proposals for infrastructure, for childcare, et cetera?
Well, so I'll start with the last first. Make sure the things are paid for. If you're going to do an infrastructure proposal, make sure that it really actually is paid for. The Biden one is not. No two ways about it. I can slice and dice the numbers if you'd like, and also I wouldn't attach policies that are sure to hurt the economy with spending on infrastructure. I would put revenues that fund infrastructure by users and asset recycling and other innovative ideas to fund infrastructure, so that you're actually taking 2 steps forward, not 1 step forward, 1 step back. You don't want spending on infrastructure, which arguably is good for the economy over a period of time. It is over a period of time, and then bad tax policy that sets you back. So I think ideology is really what's behind a lot of these proposals. Put the ideology aside, meaning the left-wing ideology, and have sound projects that are good for the infrastructure of the country, the military, and the rest, combined with revenue proposals that are modernized for the 21st century. When I say modernized, gas tax is a losing revenue source. Engines are becoming much more efficient, and people aren't even using gas. They're going to electric. So that revenue base doesn't really work anymore. So don't keep raising gas taxes. Just switch to a user fee finance system, like a vehicle miles travel tax or something like that. So I think you can have better policies on this. On fiscal responsibility, in the early 2000s, we lost our majority in the mid 2000s, and we regained our majority on the mantle of fiscal responsibility. That is why I would argue we came back in the majority. And that's when I kind of rose in my career, building budgets that balance, building fiscal responsibility. The Tea Party was a fiscal responsibility movement. It got replaced with populism. Some of which was untethered to core principles or core policies. The Trump populism sort of went wherever Trump went. It wasn't always tethered to longstanding fiscal conservative Republican policies. I think we need to get that back. I don't think it takes too much to do, because most Republicans, whether those seeking office, those in office, or voters, would like fiscal conservative policies. So I think reacquainting ourselves with fiscal conservative solutions to our problems, and the fact that we're getting to a point where our debt is really getting out of control, where our currency is being threatened over the long term, those horizon existential problems, I think, are going to make it so that the politics of this matter more. And so I believe that a Republican who wants to, let's just say, win the nomination is going to have to speak to this issue. I think the Republican voter is going to demand that. And the culture war is one thing, going after woke capitalism and the rest, I completely agree with and understand that, but it's not enough. China, everybody agrees on that. But on fiscal conservatism, I think we need some more work to do. What I'm trying to say is there is a coalition there to be built, different than, but not unlike what Ronald Reagan did when he came around. He thought there was a culture conservative, an economic conservative, and a national security conservative stool you built your platform on. Something similar to that, but more for our time, is what is needed for the conservative movement today. And I think there are a lot of people who are going to compete for that mantle. I'm hoping that we have a party that isn't wrapped around one personality, but is wrapped around a set of ideas and principles where many people are capable of carrying that mantle, and the best among them become the leader.
So I guess that kind of follows naturally to my next question, which a number of our audience members have asked about. And there's certainly been kind of a crisis of conservatism that's unfolded this past year. And the spotlight has fallen, in recent weeks on Liz Cheney. How do you think Republicans should kind of approach the schism within their own ranks? And in 2022, 2024, would you like to see, for the issues that you've highlighted, namely monetary, fiscal policy, fiscal responsibility, would you like to see a party in a House that, is relatively free from kind of the Trumpian influence and the populist influence?
Yeah, I mean, look, I ran the House up till about 2 years and 6 months ago. I believe House Republicans are still fiscal conservatives. I fundamentally believe that. They're still very close friends of mine. I believe Senate Republicans are still fiscal conservatives. I think we have lost this mantle, though. So I don't think, first of all, you have to win the hearts and minds of people to get an issue moving. Check. I think we've got that in Congress. Second of all, you got to offer it up and go run on it and have a coherent message. That's what needs to be done. But the first line of business, people in Congress, in party leadership roles, believing that we have to get back to fiscal conservatism, that exists. So it's not as if we have to go convince rank and file House and Senate Republicans, you guys, we got to balance the budget, we got to pay down the debt, this is a problem. They believe that. It's just getting the political messaging and getting political leaders to really push this more, in my mind's eye, is what is needed. So are we a party of fiscal monetary conservatism? We're not known for it right now, but I think at the core we are. We just got to get going on that. With Liz, the whole thing's so regrettable. These are all good friends of mine. I feel horrible about this situation. Ultimately, we're going to have to be a party of plurality. We're going to have to be a party that accepts. There's a two-party system. Both parties are pretty much tied for the size, just if we want to talk election-wise. You have to have a big tent party to accommodate people of different views within your party in order to be a majority party. So clearly, we're going to have to work at becoming a more majority big tent party that accompanies different views. And the conservative movement, and I've experienced this in my young career, has got to get comfortable with accepting views from other right of center people within our constellation if we're going to be a majority party. Like I said, we did very well down ballot in 2020. I think we're going to do very well in 2022. So I don't think it's a dire situation, but I do think we could get a few things wrong if we move in the wrong direction.
One of the issues that's been proposed as kind of a bridge between different wings of the Republican Party has been family policy. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, what sort of policies, and you've worked a lot on poverty, you're doing poverty work right now, what sorts of policies do you think ought to be implemented towards that end? And do you think policies like paid family leave, medical leave, or child allowances, are the way to support American families? Does more need to be done? Does less need to be done?
Yeah, I'm part of this debate, actually. There's a big debate between should we focus on family formation or should we focus on work? So I spent my early days on welfare reform when we did it back in the mid-90s. And then I worked on renewing welfare reform throughout my career. And our emphasis was on promoting work. And by promoting work, you're actually helping families the most. My close friend Mitt Romney has a child support allowance, which is more focused on family formation incentives. And there's a debate right now in the conservative movement. No, we need to focus on family formation. No, we need to focus on work. I think work is, if you have to pick among the two, you can influence work more through government policy than you can influence family formation. A tax credit is going to matter more to moving a person from welfare to work than is going to move a person to have more children. So I think you're going to have more policy effect on work-focused policies than on family formation policies. At the same time, you don't want to disincentivize. You don't want to have a marriage penalty. You don't want to disincentivize child formation. So I believe you can build on these policies, and I would not erect new policies. I would refine the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit to work better to promoting these laudable goals of keeping families intact, of forming families, but of getting people to work, to getting parents to work. So I really do think in the conservative debate among conservative reformers, the emphasis on work is really important. Right now, you've got Bidenomics that is basically attempting to pay people not to work. That is the worst of all worlds because people's skills will atrophy and the economy will have labor shortages and small businesses will go under as a result. And that will lower economic growth and that will lower job creation. That will lower wages. So I think the fight that we need right now is to focus on getting people to work and getting people skills so they can have great jobs, focus on upward mobility. That, in my mind's eye, in this debate that is occurring within conservatism, is where the focus ought to be versus solely focusing on family formation. But the point being, there's a good rich debate in the conservative movement about how best to have intact families, how best to grow wages and build the escalator of upward mobility, and keep ourselves safe and keep ourselves free in this great debate. We are tearing each other apart internally with polarization. That's how democracy is being stress tested from within. And we have existential challenges from near peer or real peer competition from the likes of China or Russia. So we're getting it from both sides as a democracy. We have to prove that democracy, self-governing government can perform and outperform these ubiquitous technical, tyrannies like China in the 21st century. So serious challenges that we have no choice but to overcome, because this great experiment of self-government could be realistically displaced come the end of the century by the likes of China, who can prove that they're better, they're faster, they're stronger, they're more nimble. I don't think that's going to happen. That's the narrative that they would like the world to buy into. I believe we're going to win this thing, but the faster we get families intact, people out of poverty, economic growth going, and keeping innovation in this country, then we're gonna overcome these real challenges to democracy, and not tearing ourselves apart from within is the first step in that road.
You kind of combined foreign threats and the labor market here. Might be a good time to talk about trade. And we have an audience member who's from Wisconsin's 1st District, and she wanted to ask how government work can increase technology job growth in the central U.S. I know you mentioned President trade policy.
Yeah, you mean she means the interior, like in the Midwest.
Yes.
Is that what, geographically?
Yeah. So Rust Belt, Midwest. When job creation projects, she specifically mentions the Foxconn factory in Racine County, when a lot of these projects haven't lived up to what was initially planned.
Yeah, well, that's clearly the case there with that particular project at Foxconn, which is over in Racine. Opportunity zones, as Bill mentioned, is a good way. We have a lot of opportunity zones in Wisconsin. In the Rust Belt, there are opportunities. There are about 3,000 in America, many of which are in the Rust Belt. That means you have an incentive to take an investment, put it into these dilapidated, poorer areas. Keep your investment there for at least 10 years and you don't pay capital gains tax. So it's an enormous economic incentive for poor rural and inner city America to bring these kinds of investments. So I think that's one way in which government can really revitalize. In the 1st District, and I know all the spots that are opportunity zones, it's exactly where you drive by, whether you're Racine, Kenosha, Janesville, you're like, this area is in dire need of economic development, good jobs, good investments. There is a tool now to do that, and we're just starting to see the fruits of that labor. So I think that's an area in which the government can do a lot. The other area is skills training, education, getting skills. So since this person is from South Central Wisconsin, we need to do a better job of getting people the skills they need to get good jobs. And that means making 2-year school, associate's degrees easier to achieve, but dealing with the graduation crisis. No one graduates from this. It is really hard for people to follow through and get their 2-year degrees. So I think there are a lot of techniques we can employ to make sure that people actually get the degree and not just stuck with debt, that they can get a good job afterwards. So the point I'm trying to make is, whether it's tax incentives, education reforms, or things like regulatory sandboxes that give innovators a lower barrier to innovate, a regulatory barrier that's removed, a tax incentive that's employed, an educated workforce to employ, that is how you get innovation into the parts of the country that have not seen it for a long time. If you want Silicon Valley in the Midwest, that's how you do it.
So we've talked about a number of issues that you feel ought to be sort of legislative priorities for Republicans. Republicans are, of course, in the minority right now. I'm wondering what issues you think Republicans would be wisest to focus on during the Biden administration when they're in the minority, and what areas you think they can gain ground on while they're in office.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in choice-based elections. I'm not a big fan of referendum elections. Referendum elections it's a referendum on the incumbent. If the incumbent's not real popular, then you'll win. But if something happens and the incumbent all of a sudden becomes popular, your entire campaign plan goes out the window. Choice-based elections are, I think, this party or this incumbent, meaning the Democratic incumbent party, is wrong on these issues. here's how we would do things differently. If elected, this is where we'll go. That's what we did with our Better Way. In the 2016 election, we launched a Better Way initiative. As Republicans, we said, these are the issues that we want to tackle. We're going to challenge the Democrats. We're going to offer a different vision. It was tax reform. It was regulatory relief. It was a whole gamut of things. And we actually passed all but our healthcare bill in that vision. So we redid the criminal justice system. We had the Cures Act for cancer. We rewrote the tax system. We rewrote the regulatory structure. We did all these things we said we would do, passed twice the amount of bills you pass in an average session of Congress. And we got great results as a result of that. The pandemic clearly changed the political equation. But my argument is you need to have an agenda that you run on to show how you would do things differently. And in this particular case, jobs, economic growth, wage increase, poverty, and dealing with things like China. I think the Biden administration wants to confront China. They understand the great power struggle we have, but they're proposing tax policy that would tie both our hands behind our back and make it easier for China to compete against us. So I just don't think ideologically they're well comported to actually competing with China like they claim they want to. On sanctions and foreign policy, sure. But on making America healthier and stronger economically, they're doing a terrible job of that. So I think that's a perfect example for a Republican agenda to show how we would have stronger economic growth from the bottom up, and how that stronger economic growth and innovation will allow us to compete in the world stage against this real challenge we have from the likes of China, in addition to helping our people make the most of their lives, live the best versions of themselves, become the best versions of themselves, and live their best possible life. That kind of an aspirational vision is, in my mind, what the center-right Republican Party ought to be able to offer. And I don't think we have a long ways to go to get there. We have to get away from grievance identity politics and get on to aspirational politics that include people who want to see us put our solutions in place.
Plenty of Democrats think that, part of the vision of economic growth for our country is the Green New Deal or these massive climate plans. And I think, as you would agree, most of these proposals would hurt the economy more than they would help it. And I'm wondering what opportunities you think there are for Republican leadership on climate change. I know Senator Romney has come out with some support for market-based solutions like carbon pricing. What's kind of your vision for Republican climate policy?
Innovation. I think in this issue, I think ideology sort of gets in the way of the left. I think in addition to wanting to challenge, to confront climate, they want to also get a twofer and have just redistribution and have the government control more industries. So I think what's happening is they're using these issues and affixing their ideology onto it. That's like this modern monetary theory that they're proposing. It's basically, ideology getting the best of these issues. And I think we can do a better job. And I think innovation is really it. Why do we have to trade in our economy? Why do we have to make the poor suffer more, pay more, get hurt the first and the worst with Green New Deals when we could innovate our way out of these problems and have technologies through basic research and incentives to solve these problems without having to trash our economy and hurt the wage earner the most in the meantime? So that to me is just is it some $2 trillion 10-point plan? No. But is it a better system that has a better chance of working and making our environment cleaner and being better custodians of the environment while also leading in the economy and creating jobs? Yeah. So we don't have to trade off. We can have both. We can have a good economy and a cleaner environment.
And do you think the federal government needs kind of like a central innovation policy? A lot of Republicans referred recently to sort of industrial policy.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think basic research, which we do at National Science Foundation on certain things, but there's a company in Janesville, Wisconsin I'm involved with that's knocking on the door of nuclear technology breakthroughs. So there's commercial technologies out there that should survive in the whims of the real economy to fix these problems. Industrial policy is not the answer. The only reason industrial policy should ever be contemplated, in my mind, is national security. That's where Chinese state-owned enterprises trying to take over the semiconductor industry, for example, That's where federal industrial policy may be worthwhile or necessary because of national security reasons. But I don't think this rises to that occasion. You're just going to have more cylinders. You're going to have more boondoggles. You're going to have more government picking and choosing winners and losers. Put right incentives out there and let technology and entrepreneurs and great minds, meet those needs for society.
We have an audience member who's asking about immigration policy, and I'll paraphrase a bit, but do you think that strong opposition to kind of open immigration policy of the kind that Biden has gone ahead with and the kind that Trump critiqued, is this still a winning issue for the GOP, or are we right to emphasize other things and avoid kind of the identitarian?
It's a winning issue. I just wish we got to be careful because you can play identity politics on this. You got to be careful. I believe strongly in an immigration system that has strong, vibrant legal immigration. I think we should rework our legal immigration to fit our economy's needs. I was this close to passing a bill in July of 2018, but a tweet from who blew it up. But I was so close to getting that done. I've been at the altar on this issue so many times, but so border security is very important. Knowing who's coming and going, but also having a legal system that actually works and fits the 21st century economy and society. If we get that, there's no stopping America. I mean, we have so many hardworking, talented people seeking to come to this country to make a big difference. Immigration is who we are. It's what we're from. And it's a good thing. And we should celebrate it. At the same time, we also want to make sure that we have control of our southern border, that we have control of that our asylum laws work so that people truly seeking asylum get asylum and people don't use loopholes to abuse those things. So I think we need to fix our immigration system. But that's the problem. I just know there are enough Democrats and Republicans who would think like Bill Klunkler thinks on this issue, saying, let's fix legal immigration, let's secure our border, let's have things like E-Verify, but let's celebrate immigration, have guest worker programs, and fix this problem for the 21st century. That is there. I could design on this legal pad an immigration system that would work, but political opportunity has killed us on this issue from the left and the right. And it's just, we've not been able to get the political planets to align themselves in this issue. Bush tried and failed. Obama tried and failed. Trump tried and failed. Sooner or later, we're going to break through this issue. And it's one in which neither side can dominate the other. You got to pair border security with legal immigration reforms, and then a smart way to transition the undocumented population with the right kinds of incentives and disincentives to kind of reset the system. I think that can be done. I think you get that and entitlements under control, and those two issues right there pretty much put America in the pole position for the rest of the century.
So on a tactical level, if the GOP gains control of the House in 2022, how much of the Biden spending agenda do you think Republicans can limit?
All of it. I mean, if we control the House or the Senate, we can control all of it. Now, having said that, you have to fund the government. You're going to have, we call these omnibuses. I hate omnibuses, but discretionary spending is basically a third of spending, government agency budgets. That's where you have a negotiation with spending. But what Biden's proposing are entitlements. He's proposing not discretionary spending as much as brand new entitlements, unpaid for entitlements. That is something that I think with divided government, you would have cooler heads prevailing on this. He's trying to be FDR with an FDR-like mandate, and you got a 50-50 Senate and a 5-vote House. It's just not viable. That I don't know why. I mean, I know why he's doing it. I just don't think it's. He shouldn't have done it. He should have gone to the center, and he would have been a hero. Instead, he's unifying his party because the squeaky wheel is the progressive base. I know what it's like to have bases yelling at you. I've dealt with that, and he's taken the easier path. But frankly, it's not the path that the country voted for. Frankly, in 2020.
So, as someone who's been in the House for as long as you have, or as long as you had been, I'm wondering what you think is necessary in terms of structural reform of the legislative process to make government more efficient and sort of to make legislation roll through smoother and quicker.
The appropriation process, I just kind of mentioned this, is utterly broken. You have to redo the appropriations process. Right now, I had way too much power as Speaker of the House than I ever should have. I'm serious. You have 12 bills, which are a third of all government spending, all the government agency budgets. Those are supposed to be separate appropriations bills, negotiated between specialists on the committees that run those committees, separate bills with men and women in Congress who spend their entire careers studying this section of government, making the decisions on how it should be done and funded, passing separate bills. That never happens anymore. It all gets lumped into one big $1 trillion+ bill, basically written by, negotiated by 4 people: the Speaker of the House, the Minority Leader of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, and the Senate Minority Leader. We call it 4 corners. Those 4 people basically write the bill that funds government from year to year. Far too much power in too few people. So you need to decentralize power in Congress. And the way to decentralize power is to reboot the appropriations process and the budgeting process. I would go to a biennial budget, and I won't get into it, it gets kind of complicated. I would rebuild the way the appropriation spending and the budget system works so that you decentralize the power, and men and women who actually spend all their time on various government agencies and issues, overseeing the Department of Education, overseeing the Department of Energy, those people write the law, not somebody making, a last minute decision. We're smart people, we make informed decisions, but we didn't spend a year reading IG reports and GAO reports, studying agencies. Those are the people in Congress who should be making those decisions. The last point I'd say is most of the laws that we experience these days are not laws written by your elected representatives. They're rules and regulations written by unelected bureaucrats in executive agencies. So 31 state legislatures have a system whereby they write a law, probably fairly vaguely worded. Then the executive branch agency writes a regulation to implement and execute that law. And that regulation comes back to the state legislature for a final vote, approval, or amendment before it goes into effect, so they can make sure that it jives with the intent of the legislation as written by the legislators, the elected people. Congress doesn't do that. Congress passes lots of big, vague laws, and then the executive branch agency go and basically effectively write those laws, rules and regulations and penalties, and that's it. They don't come back to Congress for a final vote, approval, or vetting before they go into effect. If you did that, we called it the REINS Act, that will restore the lawmaking authority back to the elected branch of government, restore power more directly to the people, but also add another layer of accountability so that the unelected bureaucracy, the unelected branch of government, is not basically writing our laws that we all live under. You do those 2 things, the REINS Act, the budget process, the budget system, and I think you'll do a lot to decentralize power in Washington and government, and to have a more transparent, more accountable government.
In terms of budgets, a big part of the budget obviously goes to the military. What sort of line do you think Republicans ought to straddle between being committed to national security and also being concerned about the deficit and, many of the strategic concerns that you voiced about debt?
Spending caps. So I negotiated the spending caps that we had in place that expire this year. I negotiated all the cap agreements we had. That's what I did when I was budget chair. Patty Murray and I did a budget agreement where we were hitting the sequester. It was hurting the military. She and I negotiated a new spending cap arrangement, but we cut spending and mandatory spending, meaning entitlement spending, to more than pay for it. And that resulted in more deficit reductions. That was a pretty good example of a conservative Republican and a progressive Democrat putting together an agreement. This was the Murray-Ryan agreement in 2014 when we did that. And that kind of an agreement is the way to go. The spending caps on discretionary spending, which more than half is the Defense Department, those expire this year. So it's uncapped spending now. So I think you need to extend new discretionary caps, forcing the prioritization. It forces the military to prioritize. It forces obsolete programs to go away to make room for new programs. That's what happens with the military is you have these legacy programs that have their own, their own incumbencies. They have their own constituencies. They're in someone's congressional district. They're made in somebody's state. Those things stay. And then you add on top the things you need and want. With spending caps, you force a prioritization, get rid of these obsolete programs to make budgetary space for the things we need. So even the Pentagon, as important as I think it is, has got to operate under that kind of budgetary pressure. And that pressure literally is going away this year. I think, last year was the last year of spending caps. So you need discretionary caps. And entitlement spending, you've got to reform the way our entitlement programs, namely our healthcare programs work. That's a longer conversation, but we're going to run out of time pretty soon. You'll have to cut entitlements in real time if you want to stave off a dollar crisis, if we stay on the path we are on. If we do reform our entitlement programs, we can keep them the way they are for the current retirees, reform them for the next generation so that we can still fulfill the mission of these programs, albeit in a different way than they're done now, because right now they're going bankrupt.
I want to ask one more kind of policy related question before maybe you go into some final reflections on the last couple of minutes. But a number of state legislatures in recent months have been passing election integrity laws. I'm wondering how much of a winning message do you think election security is for Republicans on the federal level and then also on the state level?
Yeah, I'm a federal guy, so I'm not as close to the nuances of these laws. I think it's important. I think it's important that people have confidence in elections. In Wisconsin, we have photo ID. We basically copied Indiana's system because it went through states, courts, and federal court approvals. It was challenged at federal court. It sustained that challenge. So we have a good system of photo ID. That is only natural to have. So I think it's important that people have confidence in the election. I think the duration of these elections, the conduct of these elections taking a while is what frustrated people. But mind you, this last episode we were in the middle of a pandemic. So we had a pandemic where we didn't want seniors coalescing together. So there were some real legitimate problems, and states changed the procedures because of a pandemic. That gave rise to lots of concerns and accusations. Having said that, there has been no evidence that this election would have gone differently, that this election was stolen or something like that. I think it's important to repeat that. But the point I'd say is election integrity is extremely important if American citizens believe that their franchise is protected. This isn't something nefarious. It's just making sure that elections are going to be conducted honorably and honestly. And frankly, with technology these days, we ought to be able to pull this off.
So I want to ask, one final question here before we have to leave. Do you have any kind of regrets, legislative regrets, during your time as speaker?
Yeah, too.
Choose the issues that you did choose to emphasize, and if you had to kind of reflect a little bit on your time, are there issues that you think Republicans would have had support for that you simply didn't get around to?
My two big requests are the ones we talked about: immigration reform and entitlement reform. Honestly, I mean, I try to sweat the big stuff. I try not to sweat small stuff. You try to sweat the big stuff that are really going to move your country in the right or wrong direction. I fundamentally believe if we fix our immigration laws, not only do we need this for society, for our economy, it's going to be huge for America. And if we get our entitlements under control and reform them with market-based delivery systems that encourage innovation within them so that we have more choice and competition to get these services delivered, we'll have an amazing century. We will keep the dollar as good as the reserve currency. We will overcome these big challenges. Those are the two that got out. Tax reform was a big push of mine. We accomplished that. There are a number of other things in poverty that we are able to do: criminal justice reform, the Evidence Act, the Opportunity Zone. So I got a lot of stuff done that I wanted to get done. I wrote the HSA law. I was excited about that. But entitlement reform and immigration reform are the two that got away. Those are the things I broke my pick on. That frankly, I just regret. But because the political planets just never got themselves aligned quite like they needed to get there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Speaker Ryan, for your time today. It was really exciting to get to talk to you, and I think we covered a lot of ground.
You bet, Jasper.
And of course, thanks, Bill.
And
thanks, Bill, for
parting comments. Go Packers.
Go Packers. And thanks, Bill, for joining us and for your support of the program.
Right. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Jasper, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Great event. Stay well.
Good night, everyone.